Just 1 minute ago, an extraordinary and utterly explosive event unfolded live on television, sending shockwaves across the entire nation and leaving millions of viewers stunned, breathless, and struggling to process the sheer scale of what they had just witnessed. A moment that few in Britain ever imagined could erupt so suddenly, so brutally, and so publicly. In a scene that felt less like standard political theater and more like a full-scale, constitutional emergency unfolding in real time, the Prime Minister found himself standing frozen behind his podium as members of his own inner circle senior officials he had relied on for years, advisors who had shaped key policies, ministers who had defended him through and allies who once vowed unwavering loyalty all stepped forward, one after another to announce their resignations directly into the cameras. Not in private meetings, not behind closed doors as tradition would dictate, but live in front of the country. Their reasoning, delivered with controlled voices but unmistakable gravity, shook the very foundations of Westminster, a mysterious £22 billion financial gap that they claimed could no longer be hidden, a discrepancy so large and so alarming that in their view, continuing in office amounted to complicity. It was a moment that instantly detonated a political firestorm, signaling not just instability but outright collapse from within the highest levels of government, leaving the nation demanding answers, journalists scrambling for clarity, and even the Prime Minister's closest remaining allies beginning to shift away from him in visible discomfort. What exactly had happened behind those closed doors? Why had his own team chosen to expose him live on air? To understand the magnitude of this political earthquake, we have to go back to where the chain reaction began. What was intended as a routine press briefing, another carefully managed update, meant to reassure the public, quickly transformed into a historic implosion. The room felt tense even before the cameras went live. Reporters, who had attended countless briefings over the years, sensed that something was different. Ministers stood stiff, avoiding eye contact with one another, their expressions unreadable but heavy with unspoken urgency. The Prime Minister, preparing to deliver what he thought would be a standard statement, seemed unaware of the storm about to engulf him. As the red light on the cameras blinked on and the broadcast began, the first shockwave hit. The deputy leader stepped forward, withdrawing a single sheet of paper from her jacket, a resignation letter that instantly shattered any illusion of stability. Her voice trembled for only a second before turning resolute as she announced she could no longer remain in a government that was, in her words, hiding numbers too large, too dangerous, and too damaging to ignore. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras zoomed in. Staff members exchanged horrified glances, and the Prime Minister visibly paled as he attempted unsuccessfully to regain control of the narrative. But before he could respond, the second resignation followed, then the third. Then a rapid chain of departures that created an unstoppable political freefall. Each resignation was delivered with claims of discrepancies, ignored warnings, unanswered confidential reports, and at the center of every concern, the same staggering figure, a £22 billion financial gap that no one could explain. With each minister stepping forward, the Prime Minister's authority eroded further. He attempted to speak, his voice shaking, trying to deny the accusations, trying to insist the situation was under review, but the chaos drowned him out. And for the first time since he took office, he was no longer controlling the message. His own team had seized that control from him live on air. Across the country, households froze mid-meal, workplaces fell silent, and television screens lit up with breaking news banners. Online platforms crashed under the overwhelming surge of searches, hashtags, and live reactions. Analysts who once defended the Prime Minister admitted they had never seen anything like the government collapsing in front of the nation. Its leader, isolated as his inner circle walked away one by one. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, rumors spread at lightning speed. Leaked documents, whispers of ignored warnings, internal meetings where concerns had allegedly been raised, and financial anomalies that had been quietly building for months all swirled through government corridors. Some sources suggested the problem was far deeper than a single miscalculation. Others feared it pointed to systemic oversight failures. But one thing was clear. The number £22 billion echoed with growing urgency through every department. While resignations continued to stack up, the Prime Minister refused to abandon the podium. He clung to the microphone, insisting the accusations were part of a coordinated political attack meant to undermine him. His voice, initially shaky, rose in volume and desperation. But for many, the damage was irreversible. The public had witnessed his own team turn against him. Trust was shattered in an instant. What happened after the cameras cut only deepened the sense of crisis. Security staff rushed through corridors, doors slammed behind hurried meetings, and phones lit up with urgent messages. Inside No. 10. The atmosphere shifted from confusion to full-scale emergency. Government offices were overwhelmed with calls. Departments scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Advisors rushed between rooms with thick folders. Newspapers hit the streets within hours, their headlines explosive. £22 billion black hole. Government implodes live on air. Prime Minister under siege. Crowds gathered outside Downing Street demanding transparency, accountability, and immediate answers. Protesters held signs. Journalists broadcast updates, and the crisis escalated beyond anything seen in recent memory. Inside emergency meetings, those who remained struggled to hold the government together. Some whispered that more resignations were imminent. Others feared a collapse in international markets. Early signs of instability emerged. Fluctuations in the pound. Hesitations among investors. And inquiries from foreign governments seeking clarification on Britain's financial stability. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister locked himself in his private office for hours, refusing to face advisors or the press. Reports later suggested he spent the time on frantic calls with legal teams and financial experts. Others claimed he had been warned months earlier but dismissed the concerns. The truth remained unclear, but the uncertainty fueled public anger. Then came a devastating leak, an internal assessment document that spread across social media within minutes. It described rushed decisions, overlooked risks, and oversight failures. It did not accuse any individual of wrongdoing, but its implications were damning. Opposition leaders demanded immediate accountability. Members of the Prime Minister's own party began questioning his leadership publicly. As pressure mounted, he finally emerged from his office looking exhausted and shaken. He attempted to rally what remained of his team, but the energy had shifted. They looked unconvinced, uncertain, and deeply worried. Outside, chants grew louder as the streets filled with protesters. News crews lined the roads, broadcasting live updates as additional leaks and resignations broke every hour. The crisis was no longer political, it was national. Institutions were destabilized, confidence evaporated, and whispers spread that the truth behind the missing £22 billion might be even more complex than anyone realized. As night fell over London, the situation escalated into a full-scale emergency. Crowds outside Downing Street grew. Tension thickened. Rumors intensified. And then another leak surfaced, a transcript of a meeting held weeks earlier where several ministers allegedly warned the Prime Minister that the financial discrepancy was spiraling. The transcript suggested they urged him to authorize an emergency audit, but the request was repeatedly delayed. Headlines turned from confusion to outrage. Analysts described it as catastrophic leadership failure. Pressure reached its peak as social media erupted. Online petitions surged past hundreds of thousands of signatures, and major public figures demanded immediate action. International markets reacted sharply, signaling concern over Britain's stability. Inside No. 10. The atmosphere shifted again, from panic to crisis management. Emergency advisors were brought in overnight. Meetings stretched into the early morning as officials argued over next steps. Some urged the Prime Minister to address the nation immediately. Others warned that premature statements could worsen the damage. But one thing was undeniable: the longer the silence continued, the more volatile the situation became. At dawn, the final blow arrived. Several senior civil servants, the individuals who silently keep government functioning, submitted their resignations. Their departure signaled something far more severe: the machinery of the state was beginning to fail. Recognizing the severity of the moment, the Prime Minister stepped once again into the briefing room. Cameras flickered. Reporters leaned forward. He looked drained and shaken, attempting to defend his decisions, insisting that answers would come soon, and that nothing was being hidden deliberately. But his words landed flat in a nation that had spent 24 hours witnessing its government unravel. Breaking news alerts interrupted him mid-sentence, announcing more resignations, more demands for leadership votes, and calls for a full parliamentary inquiry. Even members of his own party declared publicly that he might not survive the day. Then the final document emerged, the one that confirmed what the nation feared most. It detailed months of miscalculations, ignored warnings, and delayed decisions that allowed the financial gap to widen unchecked. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to collapse whatever remained of trust in his leadership. Commentators called it the most dramatic fall of a government in a generation. Supporters fell silent. Critics grew louder, and even neutral observers agreed that the crisis had become unsalvageable. As daylight broke over Westminster, all eyes turned toward Downing Street, waiting for the announcement that now seemed inevitable. An announcement that would reshape Britain's political future and confirm the final consequence of a government brought down by missing billions, internal rebellion, and a historic collapse witnessed by the entire nation in real time.